The flour-dusted ledger lay open on the counter, its red numbers bleeding like wounds across the page, and Eleanor Morgan knew her dream was dying before her eyes in the sweltering heat of a New Mexico summer afternoon in 1884. She had been kneading dough since before sunrise, her hands moving through the familiar motions that had become as natural as breathing over the past 3 years. The bakery in Abiquiu had been her late father's final gift, purchased with the money he had saved for her dowry before consumption had stolen him away. Eleanor had poured everything she had into the small establishment on the dusty Main Street, building a reputation for the finest bread and pastries in Rio Arriba County. But reputation did not pay bills, and the drought that gripped New Mexico territory had left her customers with empty pockets and emptier stomachs. The bell above the door chimed, and Eleanor looked up from the ledger with practiced brightness, though her heart sank when she saw Wallace Henderson stride through. The banker was a portly man who favored expensive suits despite the heat, his round face perpetually glistening with sweat beneath his bowler hat. He carried a leather satchel that Eleanor knew contained papers she did not want to see. "Miss Morgan," Henderson said, removing his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "I trust you received my letters." Eleanor wiped her hands on her apron, leaving white streaks across the faded blue fabric. "I did, Mr. Henderson. I asked for more time." "And I have been exceedingly patient," Henderson replied, setting his satchel on her counter without invitation. The brass clasps clicked open with a sound like a door slamming shut. 3 months past due, Miss Morgan. No bank in the territory would have extended such generosity. "The rains will come," Eleanor said, hearing the desperation creeping into her voice despite her efforts to remain composed. "When they do, the ranchers will have work again. The mines will reopen. People will buy bread again." Henderson pulled a document from his satchel and laid it before her. "The bank cannot operate on optimism and weather predictions. I have given you every opportunity. The property must be foreclosed." The words hit Eleanor like a physical blow. She gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles whitening. "Please, Mr. Henderson, this bakery is all I have. My father built this business from nothing. I have nowhere else to go. You are a young woman of 22, Miss Morgan. Surely marriage would provide better prospects than running a failing business." Henderson's tone carried the patronizing edge that made Eleanor's jaw clench. "There are several respectable widowers in town who would benefit from a wife with your domestic skills. I did not ask your advice on my personal affairs," Eleanor said, her voice tight. "I asked for mercy regarding my business." "Business is not about mercy," Henderson replied, sliding the foreclosure notice toward her. "You have until the end of the month to vacate. The property will be auctioned on the 1st of September. I am sorry, Miss Morgan, but there is nothing more to discuss." He departed as swiftly as he had arrived, leaving Eleanor alone with the legal document that spelled the end of everything she had worked for. She stared at the formal language, the official seals, the cold finality of it all. Her vision blurred, and she realized tears were streaming down her cheeks, leaving tracks through the flour dust on her skin. The rest of that August day passed in a fog. Eleanor went through the motions of closing the bakery, cleaning the work surfaces, banking the fires in the brick ovens her father had imported from St. Louis at great expense. She climbed the narrow stairs to her living quarters above the shop, a small room with a bed, a washstand, and a trunk containing everything she owned. She sat on the edge of the bed and let herself cry properly, great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. When the tears finally subsided, Eleanor found herself staring at the photograph on her small dresser. Her father smiled back at her, forever frozen in time before illness had ravaged him. "I am sorry, Papa," she whispered to the image. "I tried. I truly tried." The next morning, Eleanor opened the bakery as usual, though she knew her time was limited. Pride demanded she continue until the very end. She mixed dough, shaped loaves, and slid them into the ovens with practiced efficiency. The familiar routine brought a measure of comfort, even as her mind churned with impossible questions about her future. The bell chimed around mid-morning, and Eleanor looked up to find a man she did not recognize standing just inside the doorway. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled his worn canvas jacket. His hat was pulled low, shadowing his face, but she could see a strong jaw darkened with several days of stubble. He held his hat in work-roughened hands, turning it slowly as his eyes scanned the bakery's interior. "May I help you?" Eleanor asked, smoothing her apron. The man's gaze settled on her, and she found herself looking into the most striking blue eyes she had ever seen. They were the color of the sky just before dawn, clear and calm. "Are you Miss Morgan?" His voice was deep and quiet, with a slight drawl that suggested Texas origins. "I am," Eleanor confirmed, a flutter of apprehension rising in her chest. "Are you from the bank?" "No, madam," he replied, taking a few steps closer. "My name is Thomas Matthews. I understand your property is being foreclosed." Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks. News traveled fast in a town as small as Abiquiu. "That is my private business, Mr. Matthews." "I mean no disrespect," Thomas said quickly. "Henderson mentioned at the saloon that he would be auctioning this property. I wanted to speak with you before the auction takes place." "Why?" Eleanor asked, crossing her arms defensively. Thomas looked down at his hat, then back at her. "I am interested in purchasing the bakery, but not to run it myself. I do not know the first thing about baking." Despite everything, Eleanor felt a spark of curiosity. "Then why would you want to buy it?" "I have been working cattle drives for the past 8 years, Thomas said. "Saved most of what I earned. I am looking to settle somewhere, put down roots. This town seems like a good place for that." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "It would be a shame to see a business like this shut down when it clearly serves the community." "I was thinking we might come to an arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" Eleanor asked warily. "A partnership," Thomas said. "I buy the property from the bank, you continue to run the bakery as you have been. We split the profits." "You keep your business. I have an investment that means something." Eleanor stared at him, searching his face for signs of deception or ulterior motives. His expression remained open, earnest even. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" "My mother ran a boarding house back in Amarillo," Thomas said. "After my father died, she worked herself to the bone to keep it going. The bank foreclosed anyway when I was 16. She died 6 months later, working as a laundress for a hotel that used to be hers." His jaw tightened slightly. "I swore then that if I ever had the means, I would help someone in a similar situation. I have the means now." The raw honesty in his words touched something deep in Eleanor's chest. She wanted to believe him, wanted to accept this miraculous solution that had walked through her door. But years of struggling alone had taught her caution. "You do not know me, Mr. Matthews. How do you know I am worth such an investment?" "I asked around yesterday after I heard about the foreclosure," Thomas said. "Everyone in town speaks highly of your bread. Old Miguel at the Mercantile said your father was an honest man, and you are cut from the same cloth. That is good enough for me." Eleanor found herself blinking back fresh tears, these ones born of unexpected hope rather than despair. "I do not know what to say." "Say you will think about it," Thomas replied. "I know it is sudden and you have no reason to trust me, but I am staying at the boarding house on 2nd Street. You can find me there when you have decided." He placed his hat back on his head and turned to leave. then paused at the door. "For what it is worth, Miss Morgan, I tried one of your sweet rolls yesterday. Best I have ever tasted. Would be a crying shame for this town to lose that." After he left, Eleanor stood motionless behind her counter, trying to process what had just happened. A stranger wanted to save her bakery. A quiet cowboy with sad eyes and rough hands wanted to give her back her dream. It seemed too good to be true, and yet he had seemed completely sincere. She spent the rest of the day in a state of distracted contemplation, burning a batch of biscuits for the first time in years. Every interaction with a customer made her think about what Thomas had said. People genuinely appreciated what she did. The bakery mattered to this community, and here was someone offering her a chance to keep it alive. That evening, after closing, Eleanor walked to the boarding house on 2nd Street. It was a modest 2-story building run by a widow named Mrs. Hernandez, who greeted Eleanor with warm curiosity. "I am looking for Thomas Matthews," Eleanor said. "He is in the back courtyard, Mrs." Hernandez replied, gesturing through the house. "Go on through, dear." Eleanor found Thomas sitting on a wooden bench beneath a cottonwood tree, cleaning his rifle with methodical care. He looked up when he heard her footsteps, setting the weapon aside and rising to his feet. "Miss Morgan," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "I have been thinking about your offer," Eleanor said without preamble. "I have questions." "Of course," Thomas gestured to the bench. "Please sit." Eleanor settled onto the bench, maintaining a respectable distance. Thomas sat beside her, giving her his full attention. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the weathering of someone who had spent years under the harsh sun. He looked to be around 30, though it was hard to tell with men who lived rough lives. "If we were to enter into this partnership," Eleanor began, "I would need assurances. A legal contract outlining the terms, protection of my rights to continue running the business as I see fit." "Absolutely," Thomas agreed. "I would insist on a proper contract myself. I want this to be legitimate and fair." "Why split the profits?" Eleanor asked. "If you own the property, you could simply hire me as an employee." "Because it is your skill that makes the bakery valuable," Thomas said simply. "Without you, the property is just a building. You deserve to share in the success you create." His logic was sound, but Eleanor still felt the weight of skepticism. "You said you wanted to settle down and put down roots. What does that mean exactly?" Thomas was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "It means I am tired of living season to season, town to town. I am tired of sleeping on the ground and eating dust. I want a place that is mine, work that means something. Maybe a family someday if I am fortunate enough to find someone who would have me." There was a loneliness in his words that Eleanor recognized all too well. She had felt it herself in the long evenings after the bakery closed, when the silence of her small room pressed in around her. "Have you ever run a business before?" "No," Thomas admitted. "But I am good with numbers and I am not afraid of hard work. I would not interfere with your baking, but I could help with other things. Repairs, deliveries, keeping the books, whatever you need." "The books are a disaster," Eleanor confessed. "I can bake anything, but managing finances has never been my strength." A small smile crossed Thomas's face, the first real expression of warmth she had seen from him. "Then perhaps we would complement each other well." Eleanor found herself returning the smile despite her lingering doubts. There was something genuine about this man, something steady and reassuring. "If I agree to this, I need your word that you will not try to cheat me or take advantage." "You have it," Thomas said without hesitation. "And if you want, we can have the contract reviewed by a lawyer before either of us signs anything." The fact that he suggested legal oversight himself went a long way toward easing Eleanor's concerns. She took a deep breath and made her decision. All right, Mr. Matthews, we have a partnership. Thomas extended his hand, and Eleanor shook it. His grip was firm but gentle, his palm calloused from years of hard labor. Thank you for trusting me, Miss Morgan. I will do right by you, I promise. The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of activity. Thomas met with Wallace Henderson and negotiated the purchase of the bakery property, paying cash that made the banker's eyes gleam with satisfaction. A lawyer named Samuel Porter drew up a partnership agreement that protected both their interests, stipulating that Eleanor would maintain full creative and operational control of the bakery itself, while Thomas owned the property and would assist with business management and physical labor. Profits would be split evenly after expenses. Eleanor signed the contract with a trembling hand, hardly believing this was really happening. Thomas signed with his characteristic quiet confidence, then produced a bottle of wine from his satchel. "To new beginnings," he said, pouring 2 glasses in the lawyer's office. "To new beginnings," Eleanor echoed, clinking her glass against his. The wine was sweet on her tongue, but not as sweet as the relief flooding through her. She still owned her business, or half of it anyway. The bakery would continue. She would not have to leave the only home she had known since her father's death. As they walked back to the bakery together, Eleanor found herself studying her new partner from the corner of her eye. Thomas walked with an easy, rolling gait, his long legs covering ground effortlessly. He carried himself with quiet awareness, his eyes constantly moving, taking in everything around them. It was the bearing of someone who had lived a dangerous life and learned to watch for trouble. "You said you worked cattle drives," Eleanor ventured. "Where all have you been?" "Texas, Kansas, Colorado," Thomas replied. "Followed the goodnight-loving trail more times than I can count. Drove herds to Dodge City, Abilene, Denver, saw a lot of country." "That sounds exciting," Eleanor said. Thomas shrugged. More often it was boring. Long days in the saddle, eating bad food, breathing dust. The exciting moments usually involved someone getting hurt or killed. There was a weight to his words that suggested personal experience. "You lost friends." "Too many," Thomas said quietly. "Stampedes, river crossings, conflicts with rustlers or hostile tribes. Cattle drives are dangerous work." "Why did you do it for so long?" "It was what I knew," Thomas said. "After my mother died, I needed to make money. Cowboying paid decent if you were willing to risk your neck. I was young and angry and did not much care what happened to me." He glanced at her with those clear blue eyes. But a man cannot run from grief forever. Eventually, he has to stop and face it, try to build something instead of just surviving. Eleanor understood that sentiment perfectly. She had been running herself in a way, pouring all her energy into the bakery to avoid confronting the loneliness that had consumed her life. "I think stopping and building is much harder than running." "It is," Thomas agreed, "but it matters more." They reached the bakery, and Thomas held the door open for her. The gesture was courteous but not ostentatious, the natural manners of someone raised to respect women. Eleanor found herself appreciating the small kindness. "When would you like to start?" she asked, gesturing around the space that was now half his. "Tomorrow, if that suits you," Thomas said. "I figure I should learn how things work around here before I start making suggestions." "That seems wise," Eleanor said. "I open at 5 in the morning." Thomas did not even blink. "I will be here at 4:30 to help with preparations." True to his word, Thomas arrived the next morning while stars still glittered in the pre-dawn sky. Eleanor let him in, privately impressed by his punctuality. He had washed and shaved, his dark hair still damp and combed back from his face. Without the shadow of stubble, she could see he was actually quite handsome in a rugged, weathered way. "Where should I start?" he asked, rolling up his sleeves. Eleanor set him to work carrying sacks of flour from the storage room, hauling water, and splitting wood for the ovens. She had expected him to balk at the menial labor, but Thomas tackled every task with the same quiet efficiency he brought to everything else. He was strong, she noticed, lifting 50-pound flour sacks as though they weighed nothing. But he was also careful, setting things down gently, not creating chaos in her organized workspace. As the sun rose and the ovens heated, Eleanor began the actual baking. She measured ingredients with practiced ease, her hands moving through the familiar rhythms of mixing and kneading. Thomas watched for a while, then asked, "Can you teach me?" Eleanor looked up in surprise. "You want to learn to bake? If we are partners, I should understand all aspects of the business," Thomas said. "Plus, it seems like useful knowledge." Something about his earnest desire to learn touched Eleanor. She gestured him over to her work table. "All right. First lesson. Bread is about patience and feeling, not just following a recipe." She guided him through the process of making a basic wheat loaf, showing him how to test the flour's quality, how to proof the yeast, how to knead the dough properly. Thomas listened intently, asking thoughtful questions. His hands were clumsy at first, too strong and heavy for the delicate work. But he was a quick learner, and by the end of the morning he had produced a loaf that, while not perfect, was certainly edible. "Not bad for a first attempt," Eleanor said, examining his work. "The shape is a bit uneven, but the texture looks right." A pleased expression crossed Thomas's face, boyish in its genuine delight. "My mother would not believe it. She always said I could burn water." Eleanor laughed, the sound surprising both of them. She could not remember the last time she had laughed in this bakery. "Well, bread is harder to burn than water, so you have an advantage." As the days turned into weeks, they settled into a comfortable routine. Thomas arrived before dawn to help with preparations, proving himself invaluable when it came to the heavy physical work Eleanor had struggled with alone. He repaired the front step that had been sagging for months, fixed a leak in the roof, and reorganized the storage room with logical efficiency. In the afternoons, he took over the business accounts, his neat handwriting filling the ledger with orderly rows of income and expenses. "You have been undercharging for your special cakes," Thomas observed one afternoon, showing Eleanor his calculations. "The ingredients alone cost more than what you are asking." Eleanor looked at the numbers and sighed. "I know, but people cannot afford more." "Some cannot," Thomas agreed. "But the wealthier families can. The Hendersons, the Martins, the Garcia family with the big ranch. You are subsidizing their celebrations with your own profits." It was true, though Eleanor had never quite thought of it that way. "It seems wrong to charge different prices to different people." "It is business," Thomas said gently. "You can afford to give discounts to those who truly need them if you are charging fair prices to those who can pay. Otherwise, you will work yourself into the ground for nothing." His logic was sound, and Eleanor reluctantly agreed to adjust her pricing structure. To her surprise, the wealthier customers did not balk at the higher prices. In fact, several commented that they had wondered why her exquisite cakes cost so little. With the finances on steadier ground and Thomas handling much of the physical labor, Eleanor found herself with time to experiment with new recipes. She developed a cinnamon roll that became an instant sensation, a chocolate cake that people traveled from neighboring towns to purchase, and delicate fruit tarts that showcased the apples and peaches from local orchards. The bakery began to thrive in a way it never had before. Customers increased, profits grew, and Eleanor felt the constant knot of anxiety in her chest finally begin to loosen. She caught herself humming while she worked, something she had not done since her father was alive. Thomas noticed. "You seem happy," he observed one morning as they worked side by side, Eleanor shaping croissants while Thomas prepared bread dough. "I am," Eleanor admitted, realizing it was true. "For the first time in years, I feel like I am building something instead of just barely surviving." "Good," Thomas said simply, but the warmth in his eyes conveyed more than the single word. Eleanor found herself increasingly aware of that warmth, of the way Thomas looked at her when he thought she was not paying attention. She noticed how he always made sure she ate lunch, bringing her sandwiches from the boarding house when she got too absorbed in her work. She observed how he deferred to her expertise without condescension, respecting her knowledge while offering his own insights when relevant. She also noticed that she had started taking more care with her appearance, pinning her chestnut hair more neatly, wearing her better aprons, adding a touch of rose water to her wrists. The realization made her blush, but she could not deny it. Thomas Matthews was becoming more than just her business partner. The turning point came on a warm September evening, 3 months after their partnership began. Eleanor was working late, preparing for a large order the next day, when one of the oven doors stuck. She struggled with it for several minutes, frustration mounting, before Thomas appeared from the storage room where he had been taking inventory. "Let me," he said, gently moving her aside. He examined the door, then retrieved some tools from the small kit he kept on hand. Eleanor watched as he worked, his movements sure and competent. The sleeves of his shirt were rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle and marked with old scars. She found herself wondering about the stories behind those scars, about all the experiences that had shaped this quiet, capable man. "There," Thomas said, swinging the door open smoothly. "The hinge was binding, should work fine now." "Thank you," Eleanor said. "You are always fixing things around here." "It is easier to fix things than people," Thomas replied, then looked surprised at his own words as if he had not meant to say that aloud. "Is that what you are trying to do?" Eleanor asked softly. "Fix things?" Thomas set down his tools and met her eyes. "Maybe. Or maybe I am trying to build something that cannot be broken so easily." There was something vulnerable in his expression, a crack in the composed exterior he usually maintained. Eleanor felt her heart quicken. They were standing close in the warm bakery, flour dust dancing in the lamplight between them. She could smell leather and wood smoke and something else, something uniquely him. "Thomas," she began, not sure what she wanted to say. He took a small step closer, his eyes searching her face. "Eleanor, I need to tell you something." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent a shiver through her. "What is it?" "This partnership," Thomas said slowly, choosing his words with care. "It has become the best part of my life. Not because of the business or the investment, but because it means I get to see you every day. I wake up looking forward to working beside you. I go to sleep thinking about something funny you said or the way you smile when a recipe turns out perfectly." Eleanor's breath caught. "Thomas, I know I said I wanted to settle down and maybe find someone someday," Thomas continued, his voice rough with emotion. "I did not expect that someone to walk into my life so quickly. But here you are, and I cannot pretend anymore that my feelings are purely professional." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears this time. "I feel the same way," she confessed. "I have been trying to tell myself it was just gratitude, just appreciation for what you did for me. But it is more than that, so much more." Thomas reached out slowly, giving her time to step away if she wanted. When she did not move, he cupped her cheek with his calloused palm. "May I kiss you?" "Yes," Eleanor whispered. He bent his head and pressed his lips to hers, gentle and reverent. The kiss was sweet and careful, full of barely restrained emotion. Eleanor rose on her toes, her hands finding his shoulders, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, and she felt years of loneliness and fear melt away in the warmth of his embrace. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "I have dreamed of doing that for weeks," he admitted. "Only weeks," Eleanor teased, her heart soaring. "I have been thinking about it for at least a month." Thomas laughed, the sound rich and genuine, and pulled her close. Eleanor wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her cheek against his chest. She could hear his heart beating strong and steady, a sound that somehow felt like home. "What do we do now?" she asked. "We court properly," Thomas said. "I take you to dinner, to dances, to church on Sunday. I ask your permission to walk you home. We do this right, Eleanor." She pulled back enough to look up at him. "We already work together every day. We already know each other better than most courting couples." "True," Thomas agreed. "But I want to do this properly anyway. You deserve to be courted, to be romanced, not to just fall into something because we spend so much time together." His old-fashioned sense of propriety made Eleanor smile. "All right, Thomas Matthews, court me properly." And so he did. Despite working together every morning, Thomas made a point of taking Eleanor out several evenings a week. He brought her wildflowers he picked himself, their simple beauty touching her more than expensive hothouse roses ever could. He took her to dinner at the small restaurant in town, to musical performances at the church, to evening strolls along the banks of the Chamar River. The town took notice of their courtship, and gossip swirled. Some people approved, saying it was high time Eleanor found happiness again. Others muttered that it was inappropriate for business partners to be romantically involved, that it would end badly. Wallace Henderson, in particular, seemed displeased by the development, though Eleanor could not fathom why her happiness should concern him. She discovered the reason one evening in late October when Henderson cornered her outside the Mercantile. "Miss Morgan," he said, his tone falsely pleasant. "A word, if you please." Eleanor tensed but maintained her composure. "Mr. Henderson, what can I do for you?" "I wanted to offer some friendly advice," Henderson said, moving closer than propriety allowed. "About your association with Mr. Matthews." "Our business partnership is none of your concern," Eleanor said coolly. "I am speaking of your personal association," Henderson clarified. "The town is talking, Miss Morgan. A young woman living alone, spending so much time with a man of questionable background. It reflects poorly." Anger flared hot in Eleanor's chest. "Thomas Matthews is a man of excellent character and impeccable integrity. His background is his own business." "Is it?" Henderson's voice dropped. "Did you know he killed a man in Texas, shot him dead in a dispute over cards?" Eleanor's blood ran cold, but she kept her expression neutral. "If that is true, I am certain there were extenuating circumstances." "Violence is violence, Miss Morgan," Henderson said, "and men who resort to it once will do so again." He paused, his eyes roaming over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "I had hoped you might reconsider my earlier suggestion about finding a more suitable match. A stable, respectable man of means." The implication was clear, and it made Eleanor's stomach turn. "Are you referring to yourself, Mr. Henderson?" "I am a widower of considerable resources," Henderson said. "I could provide you with security, social standing. You would never have to worry about business concerns again." "Because I would be too busy being your unpaid servant and cook," Eleanor said sharply. "Thank you, but no. I am quite happy with my current situation." Henderson's expression hardened. "You are making a mistake, Miss Morgan. Matthews is not what he seems." "Neither are you," Eleanor retorted. "Good evening, Mr. Henderson." She walked away before he could respond, her hands shaking with anger and a touch of fear. Was it true what Henderson had said about Thomas? Had he really killed someone? That evening, when Thomas arrived to take her to dinner, Eleanor decided to ask him directly. They walked together toward the restaurant, the autumn air crisp and cool. Eleanor gathered her courage and said, "Thomas, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Always," Thomas said, concern creasing his brow. "Did you kill a man in Texas?" Thomas stopped walking, his expression going carefully blank. "Who told you that?" "Henderson. He said it was over a card game." Thomas was silent for a long moment, and Eleanor's heart sank. Then he said, "It is true. I did kill a man in Amarillo 5 years ago." Eleanor felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. "Tell me what happened." "There was a game at the saloon where I was staying between drives," Thomas began, his voice flat and controlled. "I was not playing, just watching. One of the players was a young man, barely 20, who had clearly been drinking too much. Another player was a professional gambler named Pike, known for cheating." Thomas stared into the distance, seeing something Eleanor could not. "Pike accused the kid of cheating, which was rich coming from him. The kid denied it, and Pike pulled a knife. The kid was unarmed, terrified. Pike was going to kill him over a few dollars." "What did you do?" Eleanor asked quietly. "I drew my pistol and told Pike to back down," Thomas said. He laughed, said I would not shoot him over someone else's business. But I could see in his eyes that he meant to kill that kid and probably anyone else who interfered. So when he moved toward the boy with the knife, I shot him. "In self-defense," Eleanor said. "The sheriff ruled it justified," Thomas confirmed. "But I still killed a man, Eleanor. I still ended a life, no matter how rotten it was. That is not something that leaves you." Eleanor reached out and took his hand. "You saved that young man's life." "Maybe," Thomas said. "But it does not change what I did. If Henderson told you this to warn you off me, I would understand if you want to reconsider things between us." Eleanor squeezed his hand firmly. "Henderson told me this to manipulate me into considering his own suit. But all it did was show me what kind of man you really are, someone who stands up for people who cannot defend themselves, even at personal cost." Thomas looked at her with such raw hope that it made her chest ache. "You do not think less of me. I think more of you," Eleanor said honestly. "You could have told me yourself, but you were waiting until you felt I knew you well enough to understand. That is not deception, Thomas. That is discretion." He pulled her into his arms right there on the street, holding her tight. "I do not deserve you," he murmured against her hair. "You deserve happiness," Eleanor said. "We both do." After that evening, their relationship deepened further. Thomas began staying later at the bakery, and Eleanor often invited him upstairs for coffee after they finished cleaning. They would sit together in her small room, talking about everything and nothing. Thomas told her about his childhood, about his father who died when he was young, about his mother's strength and eventual defeat. Eleanor shared memories of her own father, of learning to bake at his side, of the grief that had nearly consumed her after his death. "We are quite a pair," Thomas said one night, his arm around her shoulders as they sat on her small sofa. "Two orphans trying to build something from the ruins." "But we are building it together," Eleanor pointed out. "That makes all the difference." In November, Thomas asked Eleanor to marry him. There was no elaborate proposal, no public display. They were in the bakery on a quiet afternoon, Eleanor teaching him how to make her special cinnamon rolls, when he suddenly set down the dough and took her flour-covered hands in his. "Marry me," he said simply. "Be my wife, my partner in everything. Let me spend the rest of my life making you happy." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, absolutely yes." Thomas kissed her there among the flour and sugar and warmth, and Eleanor felt something she had never expected to feel again, complete and utter joy. They were married in the small Catholic church in Abiquiu on a cold December morning, with half the town in attendance. Eleanor wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her slender frame, and carried a bouquet of winter greenery and dried flowers. Thomas wore a new suit, his dark hair neatly trimmed, looking both nervous and happier than she had ever seen him. Father Diego performed the ceremony in both English and Spanish, blessing their union before God and the community. When Thomas slipped the simple gold band onto Eleanor's finger, his hands trembled slightly. When he kissed her as his wife for the first time, she heard several women in the congregation sigh romantically. They held the reception in the bakery itself, which seemed fitting. Eleanor had spent days preparing special cakes and pastries, and the townspeople had contributed dishes until the tables groaned with food. There was music and dancing, laughter and celebration. Even Wallace Henderson made an appearance, though his congratulations seemed forced. As the sun set and the celebration wound down, Thomas and Eleanor slipped away to the living quarters above the bakery. Thomas had spent the past month fixing up the space, adding a larger bed, new curtains, a proper wardrobe. It was still small and modest, but it was theirs. "Hello, wife," Thomas said softly, closing the door behind them. "Hello, husband," Eleanor replied, suddenly feeling shy despite their months of courtship. Thomas crossed the room and took her hands gently. "We can take this as slow as you need," he said. "There is no rush." But Eleanor had been alone for so long, had been strong and self-sufficient for so many years. Now she wanted to be vulnerable, to let someone else share the burden, to experience the intimacy she had thought might never be hers. "I do not want to go slow," she whispered. "I want all of it, Thomas. All of you." He kissed her then with a passion that had been carefully restrained during their courtship, and Eleanor met it with equal fervor. They came together in the darkness of their small room, two lonely people finding solace and joy in each other's arms. Thomas was gentle and patient, attentive to her needs, making her first time an experience of love rather than just physical gratification. Afterward, lying in his arms with her head on his chest, Eleanor felt more content than she ever had in her life. "I love you," she said, the words coming easily now. "I love you too," Thomas replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. "More than I thought it was possible to love anyone." Their first year of marriage was marked by steady growth and deepening happiness. The bakery continued to flourish under their joint management. Eleanor's reputation as the finest baker in Rio Arriba County spread, and people traveled from Santa Fe and even Albuquerque to purchase her goods. Thomas proved to be a brilliant businessman, negotiating contracts with restaurants and hotels, managing their growing income with careful wisdom. They fell into an easy domestic rhythm that satisfied both of them. Eleanor still did most of the baking, but Thomas had learned enough to help competently when needed. He handled deliveries, maintained the building, and managed their finances. In the evenings, they cooked dinner together in the small kitchen, discussing the day's events, making plans for the future. Eleanor discovered that marriage to Thomas was nothing like the oppressive arrangement she had feared when Henderson suggested it. Thomas treated her as an equal partner in all things, valuing her opinions and deferring to her expertise. He never demanded, never commanded. When they disagreed, which was rare, they talked it through until they reached a compromise. She also discovered that Thomas had a playful side that emerged when he felt safe and happy. He would steal tastes of batter when he thought she was not looking, leave little notes in the flour bin for her to find, spin her around the bakery in an impromptu dance when a good song came on the radio they eventually purchased. In the summer of 1885, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. She told Thomas one evening after closing, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby," she said, watching his face carefully. Thomas's eyes went wide, then filled with tears. Truly, truly, Eleanor confirmed, her own eyes watering. Around February, the doctor thinks. Thomas let out a whoop of joy that probably carried all the way to the plaza, then picked Eleanor up and spun her around. We are going to be parents. Eleanor, we are going to have a family. His uncomplicated joy was infectious, and Eleanor found herself laughing and crying at the same time. They had built something beautiful together, and now they were going to expand it in the most fundamental way possible. The pregnancy was not easy. Eleanor suffered terrible morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoon for the first 3 months. Thomas took over most of the baking during that time, following her instructions carefully and producing goods that, while not quite as perfect as hers, were certainly acceptable. He also fussed over Eleanor constantly, bringing her ginger tea, making sure she rested, rubbing her feet when they swelled. "You are going to spoil me," Eleanor protested one evening as Thomas massaged her aching back. "That is the idea," Thomas replied. "You are carrying our child. You should be spoiled." As her pregnancy advanced, they began preparing for the baby's arrival. Thomas built a cradle with his own hands, sanding it smooth and painting it white. Eleanor sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her heart swelling with anticipation. They converted the small storage room into a nursery, painting it a cheerful yellow that would suit either a boy or a girl. In late February 1886, on a night when snow fell softly outside, Eleanor went into labor. Thomas rode through the storm to fetch the midwife, then paced the floor downstairs while Eleanor labored above him. It was a long, difficult birth that lasted through the night and into the next day. Thomas could hear Eleanor's cries of pain, and each one felt like a knife in his heart. He had never felt so helpless. Finally, as the sun set on the second day, he heard a different sound, the thin, reedy wail of a newborn baby. Thomas took the stairs 3 at a time, bursting into the bedroom to find the midwife holding a tiny, red-faced infant wrapped in one of Eleanor's hand-sewn blankets. "You have a son," the midwife said, smiling. "A healthy baby boy." Thomas's eyes went to Eleanor, who lay pale and exhausted in the bed but smiling. "Thomas, meet your son." The midwife placed the baby in Thomas's arms, and he looked down at the tiny face in wonder. The baby had stopped crying and was looking up at him with dark blue eyes. Thomas felt something crack open in his chest, a flood of love so intense it almost hurt. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I am your papa." "What should we name him?" Eleanor asked softly. They had discussed names during the pregnancy but never settled on anything definite. Thomas looked at his son, then at his wife. "What about Henry, after your father?" Eleanor's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Henry Morgan Matthews, it is perfect." Thomas carefully placed baby Henry in Eleanor's arms and sat on the edge of the bed, his arm around his wife, gazing at their son. "We made this," he said in wonder. "This perfect little person." "We did," Eleanor agreed, kissing the baby's soft head. "We built this family together." Those first months with baby Henry were exhausting but wonderful. Eleanor had to reduce her baking hours to care for the infant, but Thomas picked up the slack without complaint. He proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with Henry when he cried at night, changing diapers without flinching, making silly faces to elicit the baby's rare smiles. The bakery continued to operate successfully, though at a slightly reduced capacity. Their regular customers were understanding and supportive, many bringing gifts for the baby. The community had embraced the Matthews family, seeing them as a success story in a harsh land where success was hard-won. When Henry was 6 months old, Eleanor returned to full-time baking, and they hired a young woman named Maria to help watch the baby during business hours. Maria was the daughter of one of their regular customers, a sweet 16-year-old who was wonderful with children. Henry adored her, and Eleanor felt comfortable leaving her son in Maria's care. Life settled into a new rhythm, busier than before but rich with meaning. Eleanor would nurse Henry before dawn, then head downstairs to bake while Thomas helped Maria with the baby's morning routine. Mid-morning, Eleanor would take a break to nurse again and spend time with her son. Thomas would bring Henry down to the bakery in the afternoon, and the baby would nap in his cradle in the corner while his parents worked. "He is going to grow up thinking cinnamon and bread are the normal smells of childhood," Thomas observed one afternoon, watching Henry sleep. "There are worse things," Eleanor replied, smiling at her two favorite people. As Henry grew into a toddler, he became the bakery's unofficial mascot. Customers loved seeing the cheerful little boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's chestnut hair. He would toddle around the shop, offering crooked smiles and sticky hugs. Thomas built him a small step stool so he could watch his mother bake, and Henry would stand there for ages, mesmerized by her skilled hands shaping dough. "He is going to be a baker like his mama," Thomas predicted. "Or a businessman like his papa," Eleanor countered. "Or something entirely his own. We will love him regardless." In 1888, when Henry was 2, Eleanor became pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect. Thomas was just as attentive, but Eleanor remained more active this time, continuing to bake almost until her labor began. Their second child, a daughter they named Grace, was born in October of 1888. She came into the world quickly, with far less struggle than her brother, her lusty cries announcing her arrival to anyone within earshot. She had Eleanor's features, but Thomas's coloring, a beautiful baby girl who would grow into a striking woman. "Now our family is complete," Eleanor said, holding Grace while Henry peered at his new sister with suspicious curiosity. "Unless you want more," Thomas said, sitting carefully on the bed with them. "I am happy to have a dozen children if you are willing to carry them." Eleanor laughed. "Let us see how we manage with 2 before we discuss a dozen." But secretly, she thought more children would be wonderful. She loved being a mother, loved watching Thomas be a father. He was so patient and gentle with their children, teaching Henry to ride a stick horse, singing Grace to sleep with off-key lullabies. The love he gave them was healing something in him. She could see it. The lonely cowboy who had walked into her bakery 4 years ago had transformed into a devoted family man who smiled easily and laughed often. The years passed in a blur of happy domesticity and steady business growth. The bakery expanded, taking over the adjacent storefront when it became available. They hired additional help, eventually employing 3 regular assistants. Thomas's business acumen turned their modest establishment into the most successful bakery in northern New Mexico. They bought a small house just outside town, finally having space for their growing family. Thomas had never lost his love of the land, and he delighted in having a garden where he could grow vegetables and keep a few chickens. Henry and Grace loved the chickens, though their help gathering eggs usually resulted in more mess than productivity. In 1890, Eleanor gave birth to their 3rd child, another son they named James. In 1892, a 4th child arrived, a daughter they named Rose. Their family grew, their love deepened, and their life together became everything Eleanor had dreamed of during those lonely years after her father's death. Thomas never stopped looking at Eleanor with wonder, as though he could not quite believe his good fortune. Eleanor would catch him watching her as she kneaded dough or braided Grace's hair or read stories to the children, his expression soft with contentment. "What are you thinking?" she asked one evening, finding him gazing at her across the dinner table while the children chattered around them. "That I am the luckiest man who ever lived," Thomas said simply. "That I would go through everything I went through 1,000 times over if it meant ending up here with you." Eleanor reached across the table and took his hand. "I love you, Thomas Matthews." "I love you too, Eleanor Matthews," he replied. "Every single day I love you more than the day before." The children grew, the business thrived, and the love between Eleanor and Thomas only strengthened with time. They faced challenges, of course. There were lean years when drought returned, illness that swept through the children but thankfully passed, the occasional business setback. But they faced everything together, drawing strength from each other and the family they had built. On their 10th wedding anniversary in December 1895, Thomas took Eleanor back to the bakery after hours. They had left the children with Maria, who had become almost a member of the family. Thomas led Eleanor inside the darkened shop, then lit candles throughout the space. "What is all this?" Eleanor asked, delighted by the romantic gesture. "This is where we built our life," Thomas said, taking her hands. "Where a desperate baker and a lonely cowboy found each other and created something beautiful. I wanted to remind us both of where we started." Eleanor looked around the bakery, seeing not just a business but the foundation of everything she held dear. "I was so scared the day Henderson foreclosed," she said. "I thought my life was ending. And instead it was beginning," Thomas said. "The best parts of both our lives started right here in this flower-dusted room." "I would not change a single thing," Eleanor said, moving into his embrace. "Not one moment, not one choice. It all led me to you." They danced together in the empty bakery. No music but the beating of their hearts, no audience but the memories that lived in every corner. Eleanor rested her head on Thomas's chest and felt the same sense of coming home she had felt the first time he kissed her. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" Thomas asked, his arms tightening around her. "For seeing me when I felt invisible. For saving my dream when everyone else had written it off. For being my partner in every sense of the word. For loving me so completely." "Eleanor," Thomas said, tilting her chin up so he could look into her eyes. "You saved me just as much as I saved you, maybe more. I was just existing before I met you, going through the motions. You gave me purpose, family, love. You gave me everything that matters." They kissed there in the candlelight, surrounded by the tools of Eleanor's trade and the fruits of their partnership. Outside, snow began to fall, blanketing Abiquiu in white silence. Inside, two people who had found each other against all odds celebrated the life they had built together. The years continued to roll forward. Henry grew into a serious young man who inherited his mother's talent for baking and his father's head for business. Grace became a spirited girl who loved horses and had her father wrapped around her little finger. James showed artistic talent, filling sketchbooks with detailed drawings. Rose was the family comedian, always making everyone laugh. Eleanor and Thomas watched their children grow with pride and wonder. They expanded the bakery one more time, adding a small restaurant where people could sit and enjoy fresh pastries with coffee. Thomas hired a manager to run the day-to-day operations, giving himself and Eleanor more time with their family. On quiet evenings, they would sit on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the New Mexico landscape. Thomas would have his arm around Eleanor, and they would talk about their day, their children, their dreams for the future. "You ever miss it?" Eleanor asked one such evening in 1900. The cowboy life, the freedom of the trail. Thomas considered the question seriously, then shook his head. "I thought that life meant freedom, but it was really just running away. This is freedom. A home, a family, a woman I love more than life itself. This is everything I never knew I wanted. Eleanor leaned into him, comfortable and content. I used to think I could only rely on myself, that needing someone was weakness. You taught me that partnership is strength. We taught each other, Thomas corrected gently. We grew together. As the new century dawned, Eleanor and Thomas found themselves in their 40s with grown children and a thriving legacy. Henry had taken over most of the bakery operations, showing even more innovation than his parents. Grace had married a rancher and given them their first grandchild. James was studying art in Santa Fe. Rose was still at home, helping with the business while she decided her own path. Eleanor's hair had threads of silver now, and Thomas's temples were thoroughly gray. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the desperate young woman and the quiet cowboy who had taken a chance on each other all those years ago. One afternoon in 1905, 21 years after that fateful day when Wallace Henderson foreclosed on the bakery, Eleanor and Thomas stood in the expanded business and marveled at what they had created. The original small shop had grown into a corner establishment that employed a dozen people. The restaurant next door was always full. Their reputation extended throughout New Mexico territory and beyond. Your father would be so proud, Thomas said, slipping his arm around Eleanor's waist. So would your mother, Eleanor replied, leaning into him. They had built something that would outlast them, a legacy for their children and grandchildren. But more than that, they had built a life filled with love, purpose, and partnership. The quiet cowboy who had offered to help a struggling baker had found a home. The baker who had nearly lost everything had gained more than she ever dreamed possible. That evening, as they walked home together through the familiar streets of Abiquiu, Eleanor took Thomas's hand. It was scarred and weathered from decades of hard work, but it was the hand that had held hers through everything life had thrown at them. I would do it all again, she said suddenly. Do what? Thomas asked. Everything. Every struggle, every challenge, every fear. I would go through it all again for this life with you. Thomas stopped walking and turned to face her, cupping her face in his work-roughened hands. Eleanor Matthews, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. Every day I wake up grateful that Wallace Henderson foreclosed on your bakery, because it brought us together. Eleanor laughed through happy tears. I never thought I would be grateful to that man, but in a way, his greed gave us everything. They resumed walking, hands clasped. Two people who had started as strangers and become partners, lovers, spouses, parents, and best friends. Behind them, the bakery lights glowed warm in the gathering dusk. Ahead, their home waited with children and grandchildren and all the ordinary magic of family life. The banker had foreclosed on her bakery, and a quiet cowboy had bought it and made her his partner. But what they had really done was save each other, building from desperation and loneliness something beautiful and enduring. They had created not just a successful business, but a love story that would be told for generations. A testament to the power of taking chances and believing in second beginnings. As they reached their home and Thomas opened the door for Eleanor, she paused to kiss him one more time. After 21 years, his kisses still made her heart race. After 2 decades together, he still looked at her like she was the answer to every question he had ever asked. Home, Eleanor said contentedly, stepping through the door into the warmth and light and love that waited inside. Home, Thomas agreed, following her into their life together, grateful every day for the choice they had made to be partners in every way that mattered. Their story was not one of dramatic rescues or grand gestures, though it had started with both. It was a story of daily choices to love, to work together, to build something meaningful from the ashes of what had been lost. It was a story of 2 lonely people finding each other and creating a family, a legacy, a love that would endure long after they were gone. Years later, When their grandchildren asked how they had built such a successful business and such a beautiful life together, Eleanor and Thomas would exchange a glance full of shared history and smile. "Your grandmother needed a partner," Thomas would say. "And your grandfather needed a purpose," Eleanor would add. "We found both in each other," they would finish together, their hands still clasped after all those years, their love still as strong as the day they first admitted their feelings in a flour-dusted bakery in Abiquiu, New Mexico. The end came peacefully for both of them, many years later, their children and grandchildren surrounding them. Thomas went first, in his sleep at the age of 78, Eleanor's hand in his. She followed 6 months later, unable to bear being without her partner for very long. They were buried side by side in the small cemetery outside town, their headstone simple. Thomas and Eleanor Matthews, partners in life and love. The bakery continued for generations, passed down through the family, each successor adding their own touch while honoring the foundation that Eleanor and Thomas had built. The story of how it all began became family legend, told and retold to children and grandchildren. The tale of a banker's greed, a desperate woman's tears, and a quiet cowboy who saw an opportunity not just for investment but for love, in the end. That was what mattered most. Not the business success or the financial security, though both were important. What mattered was that two people who might have lived and died alone found each other and chose, every single day, to be partners. They built a family, a legacy, and a love story that proved sometimes the worst moments of our lives are actually doorways to the best, if we are brave enough to walk through them with someone who sees us, values us, and chooses us every single day. And in a small town in New Mexico, in a bakery that still bore their name, the scent of fresh bread and cinnamon rolls continued to fill the air, a sweet reminder of the love that had started it all.